Ryzen 7 3700X CPU. They're asking 200 Aussie dollars, but we threw in an offer of 150, and then they came back and they said, I want 180, but then I said, I can get this off AliExpress for 157 delivered. I showed them the link. Then they came back and said, no worries, mate. If you change your mind later, may consider 150. And I said, 150 is what I want to get it for. The good thing is, though, we also get the Wraith Prism included at this price. So we're getting 8 cores, 16 threads, and we're getting a pretty solid cooler, all for under 100 USD, which is why I'm curious to check out in today's video. Well, we're going to go pick the CPU up for it first, inspect it, make sure there's no bent pins. But also I'm curious to check out the performance and see how well this CPU holds up for its under $100 USD price point. So guys, that's code for let's hit the Tech Yes Mobile. So we've just got back now and we've unboxed the 3700X. We've checked for pins when we bought it. Everything looked okay. And also this fan right here, we just gave that a quick clean out and got all the dust off and cleaned out the fan and made it look like it was brand new, and also changed the dry thermal paste over and put some brand new thermal paste on. And that means one thing now, we're ready to put this into a B450 motherboard and then test it with an RTX 3070 and see how much performance we're going to be missing out on versus, say, a 5700X. And for me, this is sort of doing a tally and making all the numbers fit right for where I know these kinds of CPUs and GPUs match together. So for me, it's a learning process on building PCs right now with the latest information and keeping myself up to date. But let's get into those results right after today's video sponsor. Never pay full price for Windows 10 or 11 again. With today's video sponsor, SCD Keys, you can get activated for as little as $15 using that coupon BFTYC. Links in the description below. So we've come into our first problem here, and this is with DDR4 speeds and the Ryzen 7 3700X. We could only get this memory to 3,333 megahertz with the XMP profiles. And these have 3600 megahertz profiles on them. And I know it's not the motherboard in this case because I've already tested a Ryzen 7 5800X3D on this motherboard with 3600, actually the same kit in Japan, and it's worked absolutely fine. So I know it's the CPU, and in this case, if you guys are buying a Ryzen 3000 chip used, just be aware that 3600 megahertz XMP profiles may not work from the get-go with your CPU, especially now that they've been used for a couple of years. The IMCs on them can actually degrade just ever so slightly, and so you may have before 3600 working, but now you might have to drop it to 3466 megahertz, and that just means a little less performance, but at least I would rather have stability over performance when it comes to using a PC. And so in this case, I recommend with Ryzen 3000 as a blanket recommendation, just go with a 3200 megahertz XMP kit. So we've just finished up now testing out the RTX 3070, and the results are looking pretty good. We'll get on to more about that later. However, what we're gonna do right now, a lot of you guys requested in the previous videos that I test with an AMD card because there's less driver overhead. And so what we're gonna do here is put the 7800X3D, the 7800 XT on and start running some benchmarks with the 3700X against the 7950X3D, just to see if you wanna go with this budget outfit, what kind of performance you're gonna lose. So finishing up testing both these GPUs out, we'll start with the 7800 XT first, because this one showed a lot of differences depending, and I do put a big emphasis on depending on the game. And so here's where we'll pull up Fortnite, for example. The difference between a 3700X at 3,333 megahertz DDR4 versus a Ryzen 9 7950X 3D with 6,000 megahertz DDR5 was minimal. Considering this is a really top tier GPU, I was surprised the differences was minimal at both 1080p and 1440p. The GPU was going with relatively high utilization as well to prove that there was basically no bottlenecking in this game. However, here's where we move on to Counter-Strike 2, where things took a completely different turn. And here's where, in some cases, the results were worse than the RTX 3070 with this CPU, which would mean that CS2 being a newer game, Fortnite's been out for a very long time, I would have to say that the AMD driver set does have the potential to give out a lot less driver overhead, but of course it always falls back to the game developer and AMD with their drivers working hand in hand to get the best performance possible with their GPUs. And so I'm guessing that takes a lot more time than maybe with NVIDIA's driver set, where they seem to have things and a lot more driver updates available for their cards. So we looked at two different examples there, but going through the rest of the games here, the Baldur's Gate 3 showed that the CPU limitations here, this is tested on DirectX 11, which is the most stable for this game, showed that the limitations here at both the RTX 3070 and 7800 XT were pretty much right around the same level there. And it showed that the 0.1% lows took a huge dive in one of the tests that we did here, but overall, this is a very strenuous test, and I actually do power consumption while I'm at it when I'm doing these tests. And here is where the Ryzen 7 3700X, if you were to take a guess that it was more inefficient than the 5700X and the 7950X 3D, well, that is to be expected since it is an older node and it's more inefficient. They're moving through the final two titles here. Cyberpunk 2077 really just showed that there's a difference between the 3070 and the 7800 XT in terms of raw performance, where in both cases, the 3700X did a really good job of getting high GPU utilization at 1080p and 1440p on both cards. And then we move on to the final title, and this is Apex Legends. And here is where, on Apex Legends at 1080p, we actually saw some stuttering on the 7800 XT with the 3700X, that CPU combination. But 1440p showed that there was no stuttering there. So really weird results for the 7800 XT, especially when we look at Apex Legends and CS2. But then we go over to the 3070, and that seems to be much more consistent across the games in terms of its 0.1% lows and its performance with the Ryzen 7 3700X. And so this is going to lead us now into the conclusion with the Ryzen 7 3700X. Currently, you can get this CPU for around $100. In fact, it can sometimes cost less. Right now, it's less on AliExpress in USD terms, but that doesn't include the Wraith Prism. Now, I really like this included RGB box cooler. It looks good. It performs really well, actually, in terms of its temperatures. While we're gaming with the 3700X, we're seeing mid 60 degrees maximum on the titles that we're testing on here. So it does a good job of cooling, it looks really good, and you get it included with a lot of the local deals that you were going to pick up. And you may be thinking, why do people include this cooler with their 3700X when they're selling it? And that's because most of the time I find a lot of people that I've asked when I buy this 3700X, they say they're upgrading to the Ryzen 7 5800X 3D. Now, they're most likely going to want to get a better cooler than the Wraith Prism with that CPU, even though I think I've actually tested in the past, the Wraith Prism is actually fine with the 5800X 3D, but they most likely want to get the best CPU for that platform for gaming, the AM4 platform, so they go out and get one of the best coolers. And so every time I bought a 3700X, it's always come with a box cooler, and this just adds to that value where I got this one locally for under 100 USD, and it came with that cooler. And so I'm actually going to keep these on my radar now and buy them when they come up at the right price, because I just love the combination and what it can do. Now, in terms of weaknesses with this CPU, it's not as efficient as the 5700X, and its memory controller IMC, as we saw here in today's video, caps out at around 3033 megahertz. You might be able to get it higher with ramping up voltage on SoC, and you might be able to get 3600 megahertz. But I'm just talking about the general person who's just putting in RAM, locking in their XMP profiles, they're probably going to come into issues with 3600 megahertz and this CPU. And so if you're looking to put together a cheap PC and you want to get one of these CPUs used and you go out and buy some new memory, even used memory, just look for the 3200 megahertz stuff. That's going to do you absolutely fine. And with the results here today, the final thing we'll talk about with this CPU, I think it's a good deal with these mid-range GPUs. 3070 would be the max I would go after checking out today's results on NVIDIA's side. On AMD's side, I would actually max this GPU out with something like a 6750 XT or an RX 7700 XT. If you were to go buy one of those GPUs, which I don't recommend at their $449 price tag, I would say the RX 6700 XT with the 3700X would be your best combo on AMD's side, and the RTX 3070, which you can get great deals on both those GPUs. It's going to match perfectly in general with this CPU across a broad number of games. And sure, there's going to be some games out there like we saw here today, like Fortnite, very little driver overhead, very well optimized, and there's pretty much no need to go out and buy a much more expensive CPU. Then you'll come into other games where if you want that higher FPS, you're better off even just getting something like a Ryzen 7 5700X for an extra, say, $30 or $40. So final recommendation here, maximum on the NVIDIA side, RTX 3070, maximum on the AMD side, rounded an RX 6750 XT. And after that, you will come into, depending on the game and the settings, especially 1080p, you will come into some CPU bottlenecks, as we saw with the 7800 XT here today, worst case being CS2. But the reason I do these videos, we're going to go into the final sort of segment of today's video, and that is the flipping aspect. I buy these CPUs, make no mistake about it. I buy them to do my research and couple them with sort of new generational GPUs and new generational PC flips. And so I want to get that balance, because when I sell a PC, I want to get the best value in terms of bringing it in, getting the PC out there, but also I want the customer to have the best experience, especially for that money. And in the process, I'm going to make a bit of profit as well, but also I'm going to be getting the numbers in my head and knowing where my recommendations stand in terms of CPU and GPU balance. Anyhow, guys, with that aside, I've now got a new build to go whip up, and that is an RTX 3070 and a Ryzen 7 3700X. You're going to have the 8 cores there, the Ryzen 7, so the marketing side's going to be good. And then you're also going to have the RTX 3070. So to close this video out, that is what the game is all about. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. And if you did, be sure to hit that like button. And also let us know in the comments section below if you have any questions or comments about the Ryzen 7 3700X. I didn't actually say how impressive it is. So at under 100 USD with the cooler, very impressive pickup right now. I would definitely be recommending it. Hopefully you guys saw the limitations in today's video. And with that aside, we got the question of the day here, which comes from April France 743. And they asked, does the KF have a quick sync? As in a kitchen sink kind of sync spelling. Does the KF good for editing videos in Adobe? So basically the KF, it doesn't come with a kitchen sink. It doesn't come with onboard graphics either too. I think that's where you're going with this question, but it doesn't come with onboard graphics. So it'll be fine though for editing videos in Adobe or editing videos in Resolve, for instance, because you'll still use your RTX or your AMD drivers and your GPU for doing a lot of the grunt work in that editing program. It's just with Intel and their QuickSync, their onboard HD graphics, which the KF doesn't have, the problem you'll come into there is you won't get to utilize the QuickSync, especially for scrubbing the live timeline for certain codecs. So it makes things more efficient in that process. Though what I've found lately is the NVIDIA drivers have actually been updated to pretty much do all that work that QuickSync can. So just update your NVIDIA drivers and you pretty much will be fine with the KF. Anyhow, hope that answers that question, and I'll catch you guys in another tech video very soon. If you stayed this far, then you're loving that content, you know what to do. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace out for now. Bye.